Hi, I'm Sarah, and today we're gonna make my project bag. Not too many pieces of fabric, it's really easy to sew, and it's really useful. It allows you to take your small crochet or knitting project with you wherever you go, and you can pull it out when you have a second to crochet and tuck it away when you need your hands to do whatever you're doing at the airport or in a car. It's easy, not a whole lot of cuts, and so let's do it. You only need a few pieces of fabric for the project bag. You need an inside of the pocket. This is the flap of the pocket and the body of the pocket. And then you need the outside. There's the body, there's the flap. And then you need two pieces, 12 inches by 30 inches a piece. This is the outside of the bag, and this is the interior lining of the bag. And that's also 12 inches by 30 inches. So those are the only 6 pieces that you need. You also need interfacing, and I use Pellin fleece. It's fusible, so it has a soft side and a rough side. This irons onto the back of the outside lining piece, and this is also cut at 30 inches by 12 inches. You need an 8 by 8 piece to do your pocket with, and that's really simple. So let's line this up to make an 8-inch cut. And I start with the 8 by 8 because then I can cut my 5-inch and my 3-inch piece out of it. So there's an 8 by 8, and then I move it to 3 inches. And there's my flap, and there's my body. So I'll line the pocket with that. Let's head to the ironing board. Starting with the outside pieces of the pocket, lay them out. And I'm using canvas, which is pretty heavy, so I need to get a pretty good steam going. Then you take your pieces of interfacing, your fleece, and making sure that the rough side is up, lay your pieces of fabric over it, making sure it's rough. I am fusing these two together, and you can tell when they're pretty much fused. They don't have to be super solidly fused. If a little bit's giving, this is actually nicely fused. You can see that I can't really get it off of there. But if it's not completely and just a little bit, that's fine because you're going to sew it all together anyway. So I've got the fleece fused onto the back of these. I can set these aside quickly, and here are my liner pieces, the exact same size. I'm just going to quickly give these a once over. And then lay them upside down so they're face to face on each of these front pieces, and then pin each one just lightly to keep them in place. I'm not doing a full edge pin. I'm going to start with the inside piece because I need to move it out of the way, and I'm not going to have room to iron this once I get the large outside piece down. So I'm just giving this a quick once over, and it's just a light cotton. So I'm moving this out of the way and spreading out my outside piece. And this is a heavier cotton, which makes it a little more sturdy for the outside of the bag. And now, moving that to the side, I'm taking my fleece, making sure I am rough side up. This is the soft side and this is the rough side. Lining up my 30 by 12 outside. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Just make sure that it's covering. And then starting from the inside, I'm fusing it on. I start from the center because I find that if I start at one edge, I might wind up hanging the fabric way off the side. So I start from the outside, from the inside, and work toward the outside. And I don't need to get a perfect fuse because it's all going to be sewn in the sewing process. But this is actually fusing really nicely. Here's my outside, here's my inside. I'm going to lay these face to face because this is the body of the bag. And as you know, you sew things inside out. And then I'm going to place 3 pins on this, one dead center. I'm not an over pinner, so I'm only pinning 3 places on this just to hold it in place while I mark it, because this is how I'm going to cut the holes for the side. So there we go, 1, 2, 3. It's all pinned and ready to go. Let's head back to the table where we'll do some marking. So now we're back at the cutting table, and I'm lining up my piece of fabric so that one end is directly on an inch line and the other is directly on the bottom line. If you don't have a cutting pad like this, it's actually pretty easy to mark it. I'm gonna mark my first chalk line at 9 inches. And if you just measure 9 inches up from this corner and 9 inches up from this corner and make yourself a little mark, you can lay it across there and that's a nice even mark. Luckily I have a measuring table and a little bit of chalk. This is a chalk roller. It's widely available. I got this one at Joann's. And so I'm lining up at 9 inches in from the end, and I'm gonna just mark across it. So this is just a straight line across. Now let's mark the other side. So I'm lining it up at 9 inches and giving it a roll. If you make a mistake, you can just wipe it off. It's just chalk. Now the next marks we're gonna make are on the 3-inch line here. So you can actually measure 3 inches here, leave a little mark, 3 inches here. This actually has a 3-inch measure, so I'm just going to line up my marks to make sure they're straight and cross those. And same thing on this side. So the next thing we're gonna do is draw an arc in each of these corners. That creates this arced line here. So this is the center through here, over the top of the bag, and this is the arc here. You can really use anything circular that's about 4 inches. I use my tool caddy. So I'm lining up this edge and this edge, and then just drawing a light line. You can use a pencil for this. I'm very daring, I'm very brave, so I use a Sharpie. And drawing a light line. And I'm gonna sew right on that line so I'm not worried about it bleeding through. And I'm gonna do that in all 4 corners on the outside. Just so we're clear, I'm doing it between the 2 9-inch lines. And that's the line I'm gonna sew along. There's 4. And now we're ready to sew. What we're gonna sew on this piece of fabric is from the 9-inch line that we marked up to the black mark. We're gonna sew around the arc, straight down the yellow, which is on the 3-inch mark, until we join back up with the black mark, and then sew the black mark, and then out to the edge. And we're gonna do that on both sides. And I put in a few stitches and then back stitch a little bit just to secure it. Now I'm gonna I go really slowly around the black line. If I find that I'm getting off, I can slow down a little bit. And just let the rest of the fabric curl where it will. You've got those 3 pins in it and they're gonna hold it pretty steady. Once I get to the straightaway, it's like being on a racetrack, woo! And then when I get back onto the straightaway, I'm gonna put in a couple of reinforcement stitches. Just by backing it up. And cut my threads. This is the body of the pocket, and with this pattern I have to decide which side is up and which side is down. This is clearly the bottom, the fissure there. But with most patterns you wouldn't have to do that. So I've determined this is the bottom. I'm going to leave the top open on the pocket. Sorry. Again, a 1/4 inch or so seam allowance. I just take it to the side of the foot. And I like to 45 my corners. So I'm dropping it, stitching 3 times, dropping it again, taking it down the long way until I'm almost at the end. 45 the corner. Oops, I went 1 too many. Whatever you do, just be consistent with it. And now both my pocket parts are sewn. And now we're going to cut away the corners that we 45'd on the pocket pieces, turn them inside out and iron them. And we're going to cut away the little arcs, the little armpits of the bag on the main body of the bag. Here's the 45-degree angle that we sewed into the outside edges, the outside seam allowance. And I'm going to snip right along that. So leaving myself about a 1/4 inch on the inside, I am going to cut away this inside fabric. So maybe 3/8 of an inch. You can even go 1/2 inch if you want, if you're really scared of cutting your seam. You don't want to cut your seam. So right now this is inside out, and when I turn it right side out, these little corners tend to bundle because there's a lot of fabric here. So here's a little trick to keep them nice and straight. Starting on the straight part, I am cutting almost to the seam through all the layers. So I'm cutting through the interfacing, the outside and the inside. And I'm going to do this around all four, being really careful not to cut the actual seam itself, just to give a little relief to the fabric when you turn it right side out. All right, it's ready to be turned right side out. You're gonna love it. Open it up so that you've got your right sides facing you, and then slide your hand through. Gently pull those through the neck of the top of the bag. And now you are right side out. So the first part we're going to iron is the actual neck of the bag, or the part that hangs over your arm. So don't worry too much about all this stuff laying straight, because as long as we get this part straight. So we want to make sure that our seams are lined up so that you've got as much of the bottom of the liner showing on this side as you do on this side, and you can kind of roll it back and forth and get it straight. And then just take your hot iron and roll right over it. So slide your finger up and make this seam lay flat. So you've got a nice straight line here and a nice straight line here on either side of your curve. You can even feel where you made your little cuts inside. It lays nice and flat. And then just press that down. And that is the armpit of the bag right there. And do that on all four corners so that they're nice and flat. So now I'm going to do the rest of the corners. And this can be set aside. Now we're going to move on to the pockets. So we've snipped off our corners, and that makes them very easy to push out. And even though they're 45, just be careful as you push them out, because I've pushed my fingers through many a corner. And be gentle when you push out your corners. Just give them a little push and they give you a nice rounded corner. And then lay it down and push it, roll it a little bit so that you get a nice even lay from the top and the bottom. You'll still be able to see a little bit of the bottom, but it'll be nice and even all the way around. And then just press that seam down. And you still have this open part at the top. So this is going to be the top of my pocket. And I'm just crimping the corners and folding it over. And then starting with one corner, just kind of work it until you get it to lay pretty flat. And start by pressing that side. This one behaved very nicely. And that's it. You can let it go because you'll pull it together when you go to sew it. And now we're ready to sew. Now we're going to do some sewing on the pockets and get those finished, because they have to be sewn onto the body of the bag before the bag can be fully assembled. So the places where we're going to sew the pockets onto the bag are the only place we're not going to be stitching right now. If you look at this bag with the finished pocket, here's your flap and here's your body of your pocket. So everything, all the stitching that's on this is on here before I put it on, except for this very top line. So this is the top that's open currently, and we're going to go across that only one time. So let's start with this far side. And drop my needle in. So this is the one line I'm going to sew across the top. So I really want to try and close this if I can. If not, it'll be closed when it gets sewn on. And it's tough to get this going. So remember, this is the open side of the pocket, and it's the part that's going to be sewn on to the bag. And I'm going to reinforce that a little bit and cut my... So there's one down. This is the only line that's going to be on. I'm going to sew it on up here. So I'm going to do one more round on the outside. Can you see that first row? I'm just trying to evenly space this row of stitching with that one. This one's pretty close. And then I'm reinforcing that stitch and cutting my thread. So one thing that's very important when you sew on the pocket, you only want to sew it to the outside fabric. I've sewn it to this inside fabric as well, and then you have to rip the whole thing off. So you want to make sure this is out of your way. And I've just tossed it right up there. And again, I am pretty lazy when it comes to pinning and measuring, and so I just eyeball this. I know this is my top because it has the 2 stitches. So I'm just going to lay it about where I think it's going to go. And then I'm going to take my lid, and I want this to cover about halfway, so that I've got about 1 inch or so, say, above the pocket. And that's when I can start really kind of messing with it. So I'm thinking that looks about even on the sides. And I want to push this up a little bit maybe, so that I've got a little bit. So this gets out of here. This is even here. This is a straight line on the bottom. And I'm going to put 2 pins in this, one on either side, just to hold it in place while I do that final top stitch. And again, I can't stress this enough. Don't sew onto this. And don't put the bag together before you put the pocket on, because then otherwise you just can't do it. So now I'm going to line this up underneath. And I want to do a couple of quick reinforcement stitches here at the top, just to keep, so as you pull the pocket down to get things in and out of it, it's really nice and secure. So I'm going to start by putting a couple stitches on, and then I'm going to back it up. And I'm going to do that twice, just to give it a little bit. And then again, when I get to the top up here, I'm going to go back and forth over it a couple of times, just to make sure that it's going to stay in place. And I want to cover about half, and that looks pretty even at the top, and I'm just going to pin this. And I'm just doing this top line. So now we are going to assemble the bag. And we do that by opening it all the way up. Move this stuff over. And putting the faces together and flip it over. So now I've got the 2 insides facing. This is the inside of the overarm flap. And here is the back of the bag with the 2 sides facing. So I'm not a big pinner. So what I do is line up my 2 side seams. So there they are, and I make them even. And now I line up the opening for the side. So these are the 2 pieces coming together. Here's my top flap, and these 2 pieces are lined up. So I get them as even as I can. This is all up and out of the way, and these are the seams that folded over. That's where you sew the 2 pieces together. And I'm going to use a clip. There they are, lined up together, and I'm going to clip that. So now those 2 sides are clipped. So I'm going to start at the top of the inside lining. And again, I'm not a pinner. So I'm going to sew straight down over this seam and down to the end. And we're going to do box corners, so your ends really don't matter that much. So I'm just going to line it up, lay it in, and then ease it over the seam. So I'm holding it down, and I'm just going to work it under the foot to make sure that I cover that seam. And once I get past the big seam, I'm going to line these edges up and just sew right down to the end. Woo! Give it a quick reinforcement, and now we're going to move on to the box corners. So here's what the box corners looks like. They give a nice flat bottom to the bag and a little width on the bottom so that it has a nice level way to stand, and you can fit things into it because it doesn't have a tapered bottom. It has this actual little box. And they're actually really easy to make, especially if you're me and you cheat. All right, so I'm sliding my hand into the bottom part, the inside liner, through the hole and into the corner of the bag. So my finger is right here in the corner, in the very, very corner of the bag. So once I've sort of separated it out, I'm pulling the two sides apart. Got my hand out of there now, and I can feel the two seams laying against each other. So this is the actual corner of the bag. This is all just seam allowance. So this is the actual corner of the bag. I am working it so that I can feel where the two seams are. Now I'm going to lay my seam this direction, and I'm going to take a pin and I'm going to slide it in right next to the seam. So I'm lining it up there, and you can start from wherever, and I'm going to go back and forth twice. Is it? Now I cut these corners off, so pull your pin. And here's the second corner. Don't want to cut that seam, so I'm leaving myself almost 1/4 inch. And I'm cutting it off. And that's it. So now we can turn the bag right side out. So reach inside and grab your two seams and pull it out through the hole in the arm, or the overarm handle. And you can just shove all your lining inside. Reach through the lining and pop out your box corners. So there's one. You can see I got my seams lined up pretty well on that one. You just poke a finger into each and then do the same on the other side. Poke a finger into each, and there are your corners. So the bag is pretty much done. Got a little bit of detailing to do, and that's it. Now pull the lining out through one of the armholes and find your two seams. I've got both my seams, one on each thumb. I want to fold those over, just like we did when we ironed the pocket pieces. Some people will hand sew this so that there's no seam inside. Again, I am a very lazy sewer. I just want it to be done and look pretty. So now I've got it tightly between my fingers, and I lay it in and close that seam. Reinforce it at the end with a couple of backward stitches. Oops, a little bit past that. And cut it. And tuck the lining back in. And work the edges in. I actually like to take the corner of the bag once I have it in there and poke the corner inward, almost making a reverse box corner. So I'm gonna push it in there and kind of do that because it actually makes it lay a little bit flatter. So there's that side and there's this one. Now the only thing left on this bag, it's pretty much done. You could just use it like this, but I like to sew a decorative stitch around the edge, and it just keeps the lining pushed down into the bag and just sort of gives a finished look to the edge of the bag. So we'll just do one row of that. You need to use your armhole sewer for this, or your sleeve sewer. You just pull off. Almost every machine has a way to do that. I'll start right on that seam. Again, I'm going with a longer top stitch. I'm going to back it up just to give a little bit of security. Oop. And then slowly follow the contours. And then when I meet that stitch, I'm going to reinforce it, and that's it. So that is it. It is pretty much done. You could do one more row of the decorative stitching around each of the armholes, but it is a completed project bag. So now all you have to do is go grab your small project and you can load it up, put it over your arm, and your friends will be very impressed that you made it. You can see more of these and other examples of my sewing at slappystuff.com. I hope you'll visit me there, and thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Thanks.